gosh, you're early.
Is that okay?
Good to see you. Yeah.
Good to see you.
Yeah, come on in.
All right, let's get started. Welcome to Practice Room Breaks with IMSLP. I'm your host, Natalie, and today is an extra special episode for me because I am here with not just world-renowned and incredible pedagogue, but my former professor and one of my biggest inspirations.
Wow, you're so sweet. Thank you.
Steven Spoon.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for being here. Before we get into this monumental album that you've made, Aspects of Liszt, which is a 10-volume journey into Liszt's musical life, I want to know how you got into music.
How I got into music?
Yeah.
Well, I like telling people that my hobby before playing the piano was beating up kids who played the piano. And my mom basically forced me to play the piano. You know, we had a piano at home, so everybody was going to play it, and I really just hated every minute of going to those lessons for about the first 11 months of study. Wow. But I had a teacher who worked really hard to get me interested, partly because my sister also took, and she didn't want to lose those two students. And so she tried all kinds of music to get me interested. Star Wars theme and movie stuff, and I just wasn't interested at all. And probably her last ditch effort was to show me a recording of Arthur Rubinstein, and it was the Chopin I Love. That was the name of the album. And I went home, and quite literally, as soon as I started listening to the album, my life was on a completely different path. I can't explain it.
Wow. Was there a piece on that album or just everything?
I mean, everything on that album just blew my mind. I remember my dad coming in because I was listening to it constantly, and he's like, "What are you listening to?" And I looked at him and I said, "Why don't we listen to music like this?" You know, and it's all the famous pieces, like Heroic Polonaise and Second Scherzo and Second Nocturne, you know.
Wow. I want to talk a lot about your album, Aspects of Liszt, because I know that Liszt is a significant part of your life. Mm-hmm. And something that I always took away from studying with you is that it was, no matter what the piece was, it was never just about the music. It was always about the composer behind the music, the life lived that allowed the music to exist. So with that being said, what was the genesis of this journey for you with Liszt? Why Liszt, and why take this endeavor on such a huge album?
Well, I like to tell people that, you know, when I was a kid and I first heard Liszt, it was a recording. I went excitedly to my next piano lesson with my teacher, and I told him, I heard this music, it's really wonderful. And he said, what was it? And I said, it was Liszt. And he goes, oh, it's just garbage. Bad music, garbage. And I was so affected by this, and it lasted for a while until I finally went to Russia, and at my first lesson we were deciding repertoire, and my piano teacher he looked at me and said, you know, which Liszt pieces do you play? And I said, well, I don't play Liszt, he's a bad composer. And he laughed at me. He was like, He said, who told you that? And I said, you know, some teacher. And he said, look, you can't avoid Liszt if you want to be a pianist. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit like, it reminded me of the story of Murray Pariah. You know about Murray Pariah playing for Horowitz?
No.
For the first time. So he started playing for him, and Horowitz is like, I really like your playing. He said, but you need to open up. And he goes, I recommend that you play music of Liszt, Rachmaninoff, and some more Chopin. And Pariah looked at Horowitz and he said, Maestro, you know, with all due respect, I want to be more than just a mere virtuoso. And Horowitz said, well, good. In that case, why don't you start by being a virtuoso? Oh. That's what he told Pariah. And Pariah said he was very glad that he got into this. In fact, he made a really beautiful Liszt album. He's a
That's
great
incredible.
virtuoso, but I mean, that's how I got into Liszt, and my very first real study of Liszt was the B minor piano sonata. He just dropped me into the deep end of the pool, and the entire time, because he's a composer too, not just a pianist, he really opened up that piece for me and showed me what a masterpiece it was. And in the words of Alan Walker, who said, if Liszt had only written the sonata in B minor and no other pieces, he would go down as one of the greatest composers just on that piece alone. So, I mean, that got me started and fascinated. And at the same time, I would say this: Liszt is not my favorite composer, not even close. But I'm so fascinated by what he did, and fascinated by what he represents.
Say I didn't know who Liszt was, and I have no idea about his music. What is one or two or three stories that you would tell me about Liszt from his life that would encapsulate him as a man?
If I had a chance to talk to Andras Schiff, there's a little clip of Andras Schiff, and he's saying, don't play those Liszt transcriptions of Schubert. Don't play that repertoire. Just play the pure Schubert. I would remind Mr. Schiff, who I love, by the way. I love him very much. I love his playing and I love his recordings. I would say, you grew up in Budapest, and the stones on the shore of the Danube River, many of them that are still there were donated by Liszt's money from his benefit concerts for the great flood of Budapest. And so the stones of Liszt and those Schubert transcriptions that you're deriding are actually the things that kept that city safe for generations. And I said, please think about that.
Wow.
The next time you want to say something bad about the Schubert transcriptions. Because Liszt, he had the idea of writing a lot of these Schubert transcriptions to actually help Hungary. And he realized that he wanted to do these benefit concerts in Vienna because Budapest was, a disaster zone. So he chose Schubert knowing that people would be excited by their local boys' music and Liszt making the transcriptions.
Wow.
So I think that gives you a clear picture of the kind of person he was. At the same time, Liszt was incredibly generous. He's one of the richest private citizens in Europe during the 19th century. And by the time he ends his life, he's given it all away. And I mean, given it away. To so many good causes. The other thing I'll say is that so much of the music profession that we are involved in, everybody watching, so much of it we owe to Liszt. He was the inventor of the recital. He gave the title to the thing, because he was in England playing, so he gave it an English name, recitals.
Wow, I didn't know that.
He was touring England, and it was, recitals were not things that people really did, solo recitals. It were always like a sort of variety show.
Yeah.
And so he gave that title, technically he called them recitals, because he would recite each piece from memory, recitals. And then he gave it its structure, which not only do we still follow, but every instrument in the world still follows. A piece of antiquity, piece of classical, like solid repertoire, and then contemporary music.
Wow.
And so it still exists today. We owe that to him. But he also came up with another idea, which is now part of our cultural fabric far beyond music, and that is the name and the title of a masterclass.
Really? That was Liszt.
So he had the idea of instructing people in public. And so that's how he gave his masterclasses. Students would come, they would set their music down on a table. Liszt would come, he would go through the scores and say, okay, who's playing this? I want to hear this today. Who's playing this? Oh, he would go through the scores, and then they would play, and Liszt would make his comments and teach in public. By the way, he did all of that, and I mean for years, for free.
Wow.
Not a penny did people pay to study with Liszt.
Really?
Yes. Then the other thing, and probably the thing that pianists really don't know about, is that Liszt, his job was, the Kapellmeister in the Weimar court after his very short time as a concert pianist. Only 10 years did he really tour the world playing all sorts of concerts, making his incredible, like Michael Jackson, like fame. Yeah. But then he took this job in Weimar so he could concentrate on composing. During that time, he was not only composer in residence, but he was conductor in residence. And he came up with a different way of conducting. It didn't look like any of the conducting that people had done before. It wasn't like time beating, but he wanted to step away from it. And when he was doing so, he told his then son-in-law, Hans von Bülow, he said, I suspect that the art of conducting could be elevated to a virtuoso art just like the piano. And once that happens, then people would come to listen to the interpretations of a conductor. And if that happens, then there would be orchestral societies all over. I mean, it's like, wow. He basically established what we think about as so many facets of our modern music making in the art world. So I think very few people know that.
You spent so much time with Liszt over your life. When making this album, did you face any kind of surprising challenges with any aspect of the music in the album?
Yeah, I mean, it's demoralizing to play this. Yeah. There are pieces that I abandoned on the project, of course. Yeah, I learned probably more than 3 hours in addition of music, which I didn't record because I didn't feel it was ready. I have a philosophy about recording, and it is that I only make 6 takes of any piece during the recording, and I do it in 2 sessions. So it's 3 takes plus extras. I record extras, and if I can't get it in that time, I abandon the piece because I feel like if I can't get it in 6 takes, then I shouldn't be recording it. I do this because so many of my heroes and their great recordings were made quickly. Like Richter made Brahms 2 recording in just over an hour. Rubinstein recorded all the Chopin waltzes in an evening. He just sat down and played them. Wow. So I felt like there was something about this spontaneity. Yeah. About doing the recording. So yes, it was surprising. It was demoralizing. Some pieces would grow old for me, or I felt like I didn't have something special to say. And then others I just discovered and I wanted to record them. So yeah, I mean, the problem with Liszt is that he wrote more piano music, as you know, on IMSLP. Yeah. He wrote more piano music than all the great composers of the 18th and 19th century put together. Right. So if you added all of Schumann and all of Chopin and all of Mendelssohn and all of Brahms and all of Beethoven together, you're still not even close to all of Liszt.
Wow, that is true, by the way, that Liszt is actually the king of transcriptions. In that spirit, I'm curious, is there a particular transcription, especially on this album, that you feel most personally connected to, or that surprised you?
The transcriptions they're endlessly fascinating because no one had and no one will ever transcribe better than Liszt. Even the enemies of Liszt said that, Like
Really?
Brahms. Brahms and Liszt did not get along. And Brahms said at the end of his life, he said, if you ever want to know the true classicism of piano technique, go study the Liszt opera paraphrases. There you will find the encyclopedia of piano.
Wow.
You know.
They were enemies?
Oh, of course.
I didn't know that.
Of course. They were on the two sides of the War of the Romantics.
Sure.
With Brahms and Hanslick and those the sort of traditionalists against the progressives of Liszt and Wagner. But I didn't answer your question.
Oh, no.
I would say this. I'm fascinated by Robert Le Diable of Meyerbeer because Liszt transcribed that piece at a time where he was really playing the piano a lot, and the piece was scandalous.
Really? How so?
Because the scene that's depicted is a scene from the Meyerbeer opera, Robert Le Diable, where nuns actually rise from the dead and tempt the young man sort of lasciviously.
Wow.
And that scene was just way too much for 19th century France, and they cut it out. But Liszt, he made a sensation playing this piece, and everybody knew those opera tunes like we know pop music. And one time at a subscription concert, he played the Emperor Concerto. And after he finished, there were calls for an encore. So he sat down and he played Robert Le Diable, and people went crazy for it. But in the audience was his future son-in-law, Richard Wagner. And he hated that Liszt had played this Meyerbeer opera. Well, partly because Richard Wagner was deeply anti-Semitic, but also he felt that its tone was wrong. And he said in the newspaper, because he wrote the critique of the concert, he goes, one day Liszt will be called in heaven to play his fantasy on the devil.
Oh no!
Yes.
Really?
So that's a fascinating piece.
Yeah.
It's also a piece that doesn't come up because those early paraphrases are crazy hard.
We know Liszt as this rock star, as this flamboyant virtuoso. And we also know him as a man who was deeply spiritual. Did you find yourself more drawn to a particular phase in his life?
Mm-hmm.
And is there a connection to your life now from one of these particular phases?
That's an interesting and really good question. To give you a little background, I every single day during the pandemic in particular, I would go down into my study and I assigned time to read everything about Liszt. I read all of the important biographies, letters, all of his teaching. And it was like this time, and through Alan Walker's books, which are, by the way, they're more than books. They are the most compelling writing on music I've ever come across in my life. And so one doesn't feel like you're reading something dry. I mean, I read every footnote of Alan Walker's with incredible interest. And so I went through these various stages of his life. And one feels every single stage as interesting, compelling, full of, like any great figure, full of dissonance, full of, how should I say, contradictions.
Yeah.
But I was especially, like, the things that I didn't know affected me very deeply. Like how he was really dealing with depression at the end of his life. And that depression was very serious. Very serious. It was coupled with probably an alcohol addiction at the end. And not an addiction, but we see that he's drinking a lot. And he writes, he said, many nights I go to sleep wishing that I don't wake up.
Wow.
And so that period, and one has to be careful with reading a biography and you know, connecting it to the music, because it doesn't always work so linearly.
Right.
But I would say that in Liszt's life, that those late pieces are born out of this agony that he was going through, and that was deeply affecting. Reading about that, of course, you read about the triumphs, and you read about this life. I mean, this was a rich life, my gosh. And then by the end, because you know he had lived such a rich life, the life was full of so many regrets and so much heartbreak and also so much nobility. Yeah.
Is there a particular work, especially in this volume, that for you right now in this point in your life encapsulates what you just said, an entire breadth of life from Liszt?
Yes. Yeah. It's hard to talk about.
Yeah.
Actually, I was very moved at this story. The piece Vallée D'Obermann.
Yeah.
Do you know that?
Yes. Yeah. I love that piece.
It's based on the novel of Sonata. And in that novel, the protagonist is dealing with great depression. Yeah. And through a sense of nature and of course this sort of rambling narrative in the book, there is an emergence, a sort of breaking through. Yeah. Transformation. And one hears that in the music, especially with the thematic transformation, that you go from this which is then transferred. You know, it's the same theme.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And Liszt, what I learned is that Liszt never ever wanted to teach this piece.
Really?
So people would bring it to him, and he would see Vallée D'Obermann, he would not want to hear it.
Wow.
Not want to hear it. But then we learn that Marie dies. You know, and Marie was his companion, the mother of his 3 children. She suffered from depression greatly, and if we can see it from Liszt's point of view, the depression and its effects are what ended their relationship. Wow. Of course, she went on to be a very distinguished writer herself, Daniel Stern, and when she dies, Liszt finally has a desire to hear this piece again. Wow. And he asks one of his favorite students, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Could you please play this?
Wow.
In the class.
Yeah.
Totally lost it.
Wow. And
he had to stop the teaching for that day. Wow. And so the idea that this piece, that's what I wanted to put together, that this piece was kind of emblematic of them and their time together, and the books that they read and their youth. There are lots and lots of things like that
Yeah.
in the Liszt lore, since so much of the music is programmatic to start with.
Yes. That takes me to a question that I really wanted to ask you. If you were to spend a day with Liszt, now, not back then, but now,
Okay.
what would you talk to him about and what would you play for him?
Oh, I think I would be simultaneously overjoyed and terrified
Yeah.
to play for him.
Yeah.
I would ask him about portions of his life,
Mm-hmm.
like what he most wanted. I would ask him some technical questions.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
But yet I think those technical questions I would not get a satisfying answer on them, because he just never talked about technique.
Oh, wow.
And what was interesting is that others never talked about technique when he played. That's the other thing that you really learn. Liszt was not like a pianist as we imagine him. He was not this pyrotechnical, robot. It wasn't like that at all. In fact, and again, it's useful to think about what his enemies had to say about him. And Schumann, who at the time was not his enemy, he was his good friend. But Schumann writes, said, last night we saw Liszt for the first time. And Clara and I both wept. And then he said, Liszt is a genius of interpretation.
Wow.
He didn't say Liszt is the greatest pianist I've ever heard. He has the greatest octaves or endurance. He said he is a genius of interpretation, musical interpretation.
Wow.
And so I would imagine Liszt would be like somebody with a almost freakish physical ability, but with the kind of musical power of like Radulupu, or you know what I mean, like something like that.
Yeah.
Because as you said earlier, Liszt's playing had a real spiritual dimension. It would be hard to describe, I think. Even like I said, Brahms. Someone came to Brahms after Liszt had died and said that someone was a second Liszt, and Brahms said, "Oh, please don't use that analogy, because unless you knew the miracle of what Liszt was, you can't say that."
Yeah.
I mean, it was just a miracle. I think I would ask him some personal questions.
Yeah, sure.
And then what I would love to see is I'd love to show him how his legacy is so healthy.
Yeah.
Now, I think I would take great joy and say, look, everybody's playing your music still. And
like you said, he defined what is now kind of the norm in classical music. And
yes.
In that spirit, I'm curious what you would think Liszt would be doing right now in this modern classical music space.
He did something new in the 19th century. I think he would be doing something new now.
Yeah.
He would be breaking up his own, genres, and he would be definitely changing things. He always had a real sense of what was relevant. And at the same time, he never sold out artistically. There was nothing tawdry about what he did. He was extremely well-read person and intelligent. And he was also the cosmopolitan of par excellence.
Yeah.
I would love to bring him to Berlin and to show him, because I was saying he was telling Hans von Bülow, this could happen. And Hans von Bülow actually took him up on it. He shut the Meiningen Court Orchestra down for 6 months. And then, like a pianist, he taught all of the orchestra in sectionals. And he came up with all sorts of things that we do today, like put the orchestra in certain choirs and groups.
Wow.
And what they did at the end of these 6 months is that the orchestra came out, and everybody knew it from the first note that was the finest orchestra in the world. And they played, it's hard to imagine, they played the 9 symphonies of Beethoven from memory. every member of the orchestra.
What?
Yes.
Wow.
So he made them memorize it like pianists.
Wow.
And of course, they were the tightest, most incredibly intense orchestra.
Yeah.
But I'd love to take Liszt to that orchestra's new home because, after Hans von Bülow left, they merged with another group and they changed their name, which is the Berlin Philharmonic.
Wow.
So to see,
this is you.
This is all, started with you.
Wow. I want to turn it back to you for a second. And now that you're on this journey, this 10-volume Liszt journey, at this point, is there something significant that you've learned about yourself as a pianist and as a person from this specific volume that came out so far up to now?
Whenever a pianist learns new repertoire, they become a different person.
Yes.
Neuhaus says the pianist who plays 10 Beethoven sonatas is great, but the one who plays 20 is a totally different person. And I like to do these kinds of projects because I feel like I learn much more. I mean, it sounds stupid to say it, but the more you play a particular composer, the more you understand how to read their music.
Yeah.
And reading music is a lifelong pursuit.
Yeah.
Since every single composer means something individual about the way that they wrote music. I'll give you one example.
Yeah.
You play all these Liszt pieces and you see the term Rinforzando. It's constantly in the scores. And one sees that there are two composers of the 19th century who use this a lot. They were Liszt, and you see it in Brahms as well, And I think the connection between these two is that they were both trying to emulate Beethoven, who was the one who used it as well. But I never really understood what it meant. Like if you look it up in a dictionary, musical dictionary, it just says reinforce.
Yeah.
But this is an example. So I had a chat with Alan Walker on many occasions actually during this project, and I said, Liszt uses this term Rinforzando. What does it mean? And he says, oh, this is interesting. He said, it's actually not a term for the piano. It's a term of orchestration. Rinforzando means reinforced with more instruments.
Wow.
So what composers mean, what Brahms means, what Beethoven means, what Liszt means, is that the music should sound suddenly thicker and also louder, as if suddenly more instruments joined. And I was like, wow, you just blew my mind. So that's what I mean. The deeper you go into this, the more you understand, things. And then you pick up things along the way.
Yeah. I just think it's so interesting because you can't say that about any other instrument, in my opinion. Violin, clarinet, cello. I mean, to be able to thicken it in that way, it's possible. But with the piano, I mean, it's known that it can be this orchestral instrument.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen anyone else transcribe Beethoven's Seventh Symphony for violin, but Liszt transcribed it for piano. So
yeah. But my piano teacher, he said something so wise. As you get older, you will become more and more interested in music which deals with topics not on earth, not on that, and that's the thing about Beethoven. All of the topics are eternal.
Yeah.
They're really monumentally philosophical topics. And he said, Rachmaninoff, he's part of our everyday world.
Yeah.
And our everyday struggles. He said, but Beethoven, the things. He goes, and trust me, that will start to happen for you. And I thought that was really interesting. And he turned out to be right.
If you could go back to the first time that you started learning Liszt B minor sonata, your first moment with Liszt, what advice would you give yourself knowing everything that you know now about this journey and his music?
By the way, I often have this fantasy of going back to my younger self and coaching myself. I think one of the first things I would say is don't mess it up.
Oh no.
Because what I did and what I still do, presumably, is that I actually ruined the pieces I love the most.
That's
Because,
so relatable, actually.
you know,
Yeah.
because I practice them the worst because I'm so engrossed by them, and I think I would tell my young self, I was like, look, one day you're going to be playing this all over the place and you're going to be recording it, so please do it well. That's what I would say to myself. I would also tell my younger self what I know now. I mean, what I know much better, and I have to give Veda Kaplinsky, credit for this, is to try to play it as easily as possible with the best sort of, I wish I could go back and tell my younger self, don't do these things at the piano, and,
Yeah.
you'd be a lot better. I would also tell myself, try not, as Liszt said to people, he said young pianists, they practice too much and they don't read enough. He said, so when they play, they have nothing to play about.
So true.
So I would tell myself to please read more. Please experience life more. Go to museums, go to plays, read poetry, read novels. Then you have a rich inner life.
Yes.
And that's a very Lisztian sort of thing.
Yeah. I think it was Rubinstein that said, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was a quote that I really stuck with. He said, if you practice more than 3 hours a day, do you know that?
Yes,
You're not being effective because you have to go out and live your life to make the music better. I forgot the exact quote, but that reminded me of that. To close out this incredible conversation, is there a short piece or excerpt that you'd like to share with me and everyone?
I'll play a little thing for you, and I'll give you an intro.
Okay.
Since it's your favorite piece, let's talk about this.
Yay!
So, Schubert Ständchen is part of Schwanengesang, which were among the last things that they ever found of Schubert. In fact, the title Schwanengesang is not his title. It was the title the publisher gave the pieces. It was probably an abandoned song cycle, perhaps 2 song cycles.
Wow. And
anyhow, this Schwanengesang, this Ständchen, is from there, which is one of the most recognized pieces. The Schubert original tells the story of a young man who is playing the guitar. We can hear him. That's the instrument of the serenade, which Ständchen means. So this is like pluck, pluck, pluck. And what he's doing is that he's wooing a young lady.
Really?
And he's singing to her. We can imagine like a scene from Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
She's at the balcony, he's down below.
Wow.
With his guitar.
Wow.
Okay, and he's playing this Ständchen. And the 3 verses become increasingly passionate, but it's all first person. But what's interesting about Liszt is that Liszt desired in his life, among many other things, he desired this real connection with a woman in a way that he could become married, and it never happened for him. Never happened for him. So many of his themes deal with this love theme. And this particular piece is interesting because the Schubert is first person. But what Liszt does is very interesting. His transcription is actually a duet. So when you hear it the first time, so it's an octave lower. he noticed that the two themes could be put into canon. And once you hear it, you can't go back to the original. So,
I'm gonna cry. I love that piece.
so now
Mm-hmm.
you can see
Mm-hmm.
this transcription. It's more than just a veneration of Schubert.
Yeah.
It's a kind of, he's given it new life.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say to people who are watching this and saying like, I hate Liszt. I hope this program can say, hey, there's a lot of wonderful, genius things about Liszt, and
Yeah.
it's worth exploring.
Wow. Thank you so much. This was such an honor.
It's my pleasure.
It was
really.
such an honor.
I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so proud of you.
Thank you for this very special episode of Practice Room Breaks with IMSLP. We'll see you next time.